Hello, everyone. Have a nice day. Today, we will explore a powerful turning point in James's life, the moment he finally opens up to his friend Phat about the truth behind his disappearance, his father's cruel manipulation, and the secret pain he's carried alone. You'll see how Phat quietly protected Diep, and how the two men decide to join forces and stand against James's father from the shadows. If you find this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. The first thing Phat noticed was James's hand. It hovered halfway across the small wooden table, fingers tense, knuckles pale, like it couldn't decide whether to ask for help or pull back into its shell. The midday sun bled through the faded green awnings of the alley cafe, striping their table with warm light. Outside, life moved lazily. Inside, something was about to shift for good. A few minutes earlier, James had walked in looking like a shadow wearing a black cap. The brim hid most of his face, but the exhaustion around his eyes was impossible to cover. His shoulders were slightly hunched, as if the weight on his back was no longer just emotional. It was physical. Phat had been waiting, elbows on the table, knees bouncing beneath it. One line from James's message had been repeating in his head since morning. "Meet me at noon. It's important." "You look terrible," Phat said as James slid into the seat opposite him. It came out rougher than he meant, but his gaze softened instantly. "What happened to you?" James exhaled, a slow, shaky breath that seemed to leave him smaller for a second. He didn't answer. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. The clink of porcelain from the counter sounded far away. Phat didn't push. He knew James well enough to recognize when his friend was holding back something that hurt to even touch. Finally, James lifted his head. "I owe you the truth," he said, voice low and worn, like it had been dragged across too many sleepless nights. "About where I went, about what my father did, about why I disappeared." Phat's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Then tell me, I'm right here." So James did. The words came slowly at first, then all at once, like he had unscrewed a lid that had been rusted shut. He told Phat about the opportunity in Cambodia that had never been real, how his father had dressed it up as a promotion, a chance to manage a new branch, to prove himself. How James had stepped onto that plane thinking he was finally being trusted, only to land and realize he had walked into a cage. "They took my passport the first night," James said, fingers curling against the table. "My phone was monitored. Every call was timed, every email checked. Whenever I tried to reach out, the line would mysteriously drop, or someone would show up at my door 2 minutes later asking what I was doing. He didn't send me there to lead anything. He sent me there so I couldn't reach Diep, or anyone." Phat stared at him, speechless for a moment. He had suspected James's father was controlling, ruthless even. But this was something else. This was calculated imprisonment. "Your own father did that to you?" he finally managed. James's laugh was short and hollow. "He said Diep would ruin me, that she wasn't good enough, that she'd drag the family name through the mud. He wanted me to be obedient, alone, and far away from her. And if shipping me across the border was what it took, he was willing to do it." The cafe suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Phat swallowed hard, anger flickering behind his calm eyes. The idea of Diep waiting, hurting, not knowing cut through him almost as sharply as what James had endured. "When I went silent," James said quietly, "when I disappeared, I wasn't choosing to abandon her or you. I just didn't have a way out." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then James leaned in, his gaze locking onto Phat's. "I know what you told my father about Diep giving up on me, about her not caring anymore." Phat's brows flicked upward, a hint of surprise breaking through his usual composure. "So you found out?" "I did," James replied. There was no accusation in his tone, only a tired understanding. "He threw your words at me like a weapon, said even my own friend knew she'd moved on." Phat's fingers tightened around his glass. "I told him that because it was the only way to protect her," he said. "If he believed she didn't matter to you anymore, he had no reason to keep her on his radar. I'd rather he think she was heartless than see him try to hurt her." James's eyes softened, the anger he'd carried for months dissolving into something raw. "You saved her, Phat," he murmured. "That lie, it kept her out of his line of fire. You did what I couldn't do from over there." The admission cracked something open inside him. For the first time since returning, he wasn't just confessing what had happened. He was letting someone step into the mess with him. "I'm sorry you had to carry this alone," Phat said quietly. "You should have told me sooner." "I know." James looked down at his hands, then back up, a new steadiness in his eyes. "But I'm here now, and I'm done running from him." The sentence hung in the air, heavy and electric. Phat studied him carefully. "So what are you going to do?" James drew in a breath, and when he spoke next, his voice had a steel edge it hadn't had before. "I'm going to expose him," he said. "All of it. The fake contracts, the dirty money, the people he's paid off. He thinks no one can touch him, but he's wrong." Outside, a motorbike roared past, its sound spilling into the cafe like an omen. Inside, James's hand inched toward the center of the table again, as if reaching for a future he hadn't dared to imagine before. He looked at Phat not just as an old friend, but as the one person who had quietly protected the woman he loved when he couldn't. "I can't do this alone," James said. "I need your help." Phat didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, eyes steady on James, like he was weighing not just the plan, but the man sitting in front of him. The ceiling fan creaked lazily above them, slicing the heavy midday air into slow, uneven beats. "What does 'I need your help' really mean?" Phat asked at last. "Tell me straight." James straightened a little, the tired slump in his shoulders giving way to something sharper. "He still lets me into parts of the company," James said. "He thinks sending me to Cambodia scared me into obedience. As long as I play the role of the obedient son, he'll keep me close, close enough to control, but also close enough for me to see what he's hiding." Phat narrowed his eyes. "Do you have anything solid now, or is this all just a feeling?" "In Cambodia, I only managed bits and pieces," James admitted. Photos of suspicious contracts, screenshots of weird transfers to offshore accounts, notes about people he kept meeting off the record. It's enough to know he's dirty, but not enough to take him down. He held Phat's gaze. "That's why I need you beside me in this. Quietly, smartly." Phat's fingers tapped once against the table. "What do you want me to do?" "You're good at being invisible," James said. "People talk around you because they forget you're listening. They think you're just the friend in the background. I need that. While I dig from the inside documents, accounts, schedules you move on the outside, old employees, suppliers who suddenly got cut off, partners who walked away angry, people he's used and thrown aside." Phat let out a short, dry breath. "So you walk into the lion's den and I circle around in the grass." "Exactly," James replied, the corner of his mouth twitching. "He expects me near him. He doesn't expect you at all." A beat of silence passed. "And Diep?" Phat asked softly. "Where is she in all of this?" James's hands, which had been restless on the table, went still. Just her name changed something in his expression. "Far away from his reach," he said firmly. "That's non-negotiable. Whatever we do, we keep her out of it. If he senses I'm moving against him, he'll look for leverage. I won't let that be her." Phat nodded. "Then we make sure she never looks like a weak point again. Not to him, not to anyone." He studied James for a long moment. "You understand what this means, right? You're not just exposing a corrupt businessman. You're going to war with your father. When you cross that line, you can't pretend to be his son in the same way again." James didn't flinch. "He stopped being a father the day he locked me in another country to control who I loved," he said quietly. "If I stay silent now, I'm helping him hurt more people. I can't do that anymore." Something eased behind Phat's eyes at that answer. He drew in a slow breath, then leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The sunlight caught the lines of his hand as he extended it toward James, steady, deliberate. "If we do this," Phat said, "we do it properly. No half measures. We find proof he can't bury it. We protect Diep from the fallout, and we make sure you don't go down with him. From today, you don't fight this alone. We stand together." James stared at the offered hand for a heartbeat. In his mind, flashes, Phat telling that risky lie to protect Diep, all the quiet ways he'd stood guard without ever asking for thanks. The months of silence, the guilt, the helpless rage, all of it led here. He reached out and clasped Phat's hand. The handshake was firm, wordless, heavier than any promise spoken out loud. In a small alley cafe at noon, two men drew a line in the sand against the same powerful enemy, one they both knew too well. When they let go, James's voice was calmer but sharper. "We'll start with what I brought back from Cambodia. Every file, every note. I'll send it to you tonight." "I'll start digging," Phat replied. Quietly, no noise, no drama, just patterns and names. No one builds this kind of empire alone. They stood up almost at the same time, but instinctively kept a little distance. "We shouldn't walk out together," James said. "If someone's watching, it's better they don't link us." Phat gave a faint, crooked smile. "Then go, I'll count to 100. James tugged his cap down and headed for the door. As he stepped into the bright street, the heat hit him in the face, but for once, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a spotlight he had chosen to walk into, A few minutes later, Phat emerged and turned down a different lane, disappearing into the midday crowd. To the town, nothing had changed. Just another hot afternoon, just two customers leaving a quiet cafe. But for James and Phat, everything was different now. From this day on, they were no longer just friends trying to survive the same storm. They were allies, united, deliberate, and finally ready to stand together against the man who had tried to control them both.
Trong tập này, James bí mật gặp Phat tại quán cà phê yên tĩnh vào buổi trưa mệt mỏi nhưng cuối cùng đã sẵn sàng nói ra sự thật. Anh tiết lộ cách cha mình đã lừa anh đến Campuchia lấy hộ chiếu của anh, theo dõi điện thoại và cô lập anh chỉ để giữ anh tránh xa Diệp. James cũng đối chất với lời nói dối mà Phat đã nói ra rằng Diệp đã từ bỏ anh để cảm ơn anh. Nhận ra rằng lời nói dối đó thực sự đã bảo vệ cô khỏi những tổn hại thêm nữa. James sau đó chia sẻ quyết định của mình, anh sẽ vạch trần những hợp đồng giả mạo, tiền bẩn và những giao dịch tham nhũng của cha mình. Tuy nhiên anh cần sự giúp đỡ của Phat. Họ lập một liên minh bí mật. James hành động từ bên trong công ty trong khi Phat điều tra từ bóng tối và nói chuyện với người mà cha anh đã làm tổn thương. Họ hứa sẽ bảo vệ Diệp, rời đi riêng lẻ, thống nhất mục đích nhưng giấu kín khỏi thế giới.